Welcome, Wapham crew and new listeners. Secure your tinfoil hats, buckle down tight, and hold on loosely as we soar over the rocky tops of the La Platas on a rocky mountain high, get sucked into the vortex of the Four Corners, and settle down snugly at mile marker 420 in colorful Colorado. It is Sunday, November 27th, Monday, November 28th. For those of you across the pond and beyond, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you, and welcome to We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. I am your host, TessaTNT, and we are broadcasting live from the Mile High Clubhouse tonight. I'm so glad you can join us this evening. I hope you had an awesome weekend so far, and a rockin' week. Thank you so much for joining us on one of our many outlets. If you're listening to us live right now, you may be listening to us under We Are Paradox Media at Spreaker.com. That's also where our chat room is, if you'd like to mosey on over and say hello. We're also live on KPNL Radio, which you can find on KPNL Radio at kpnl-db.com. You can find us Saturday nights live on eTalk Radio, which you can find on etalk.tv/radio. If you want to listen to us in your free time, whether you're working it or working out, look for us once more under We Are Paradox Media at Spreaker, Twitter, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Facebook, Castbox, Tumblr, SoundCloud, TuneIn Radio, Deezer, Podcast Addict, Podcast Chaser, and Podvine. Please make sure that you mosey on over to our YouTube channel, which you will find as well under We Are Paradox Media. Please subscribe, like any video that you've listened to thus far, leave us a comment, whether positive or negative, and let us know future guests that you would like for us to have on our show. So, this evening I have a treat for all my guys and gals out there. Tonight we have story time with me, TessaTNT, and we will be reading from The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. And Robert was alive from the years of 1850 to 1894. He was born and educated in Edinburgh, Scotland. Despite a lifetime of ill health, he was a prolific writer of fiction, essays, and poetry. His first published work appeared in student magazines while he was at university. Apart from The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, his best-known work today is the adventure classic Treasure Island, which, I don't know, maybe I read that when I was a little kid, but I do not recollect it. So without any further ado, we shall continue with The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which is a horror classic novel. Hopefully you guys have been able to listen to Bram Stoker's Dracula as well as Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which we just finished last week. So if you want to go back to last week's story time, I believe it was last week. Yes. I've already turned the calendar over to December just to see what shows are coming up. I'm super excited. We have Jim Moses on Saturday, and then we have Backroads Paranormal on Sunday. So it's going to be a pretty epic weekend. Without further ado, we are moving right along to Robert Louis Stevenson's The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. 6 o'clock struck on the bells of the church that was so conveniently near to Mr. Utterson's dwelling, and still he was digging at the problem. Hitherto it had touched him on the intellectual side alone, but now his imagination also was engaged, or rather enslaved, and as he lay and tossed in the gross darkness of the night, in the curtained room, Mr. Enfield's tale went by before his mind in a scroll of lighted pictures. He would be aware of the great field of lamps of the nocturnal city, then of the figure of a man walking swiftly, then of a child running from the doctors, and then these met, and that human juggernaut trod the child down and passed on regardless of her screams. Or else he would see a room in a rich house, where his friend lay asleep, dreaming and smiling at his dreams, and then the door of that room would be opened, the curtains of the bed plucked apart, the sleeper recalled, and lo, there would stand by his side a figure to whom power was given, and even at that dead hour he must rise and do its bidding. The figure in these two phases haunted the lawyer all night, and if at any time he dozed over, it was but to see glide more stealthily through sleeping houses, or move the more swiftly and still more swiftly even to dizziness through a wider labyrinth of lamp-lighted city, and at every street corner crush a child and leave her screaming. And still the figure had no face by which he might know it. Even in his dreams it was that there sprang up and grew apace in the lawyer's mind a singularity, singularly strong, almost in inordination, inordinate curiosity to behold the features of the real Mr. Hyde. If he could but once set eyes on him, he thought the mystery would lighten and perhaps roll altogether away, as was the habit of mysterious things when well examined. He might see a reason for his friend's strange preference or bondage, call it which you please, and even for the startling clauses of the will. And at least it would be a face worth seeing, the face of a man who was without bowels of mercy, a face which had but to show itself to raise up, in the mind of the unimpressionable Enfield, a spirit of enduring hatred. From that time forward, Mr. Utterson began to haunt the door in the by-street of Shotts. In the morning before office hours, at noon when business was plenty and time scarce, at night under the face of the fogged city moon, by all lights and at all hours of solitude or concourse, the lawyer was to be found on his chosen post. If he be Mr. Hyde, he had thought, I shall be Mr. Seek. And at last his patience was rewarded. It was a fine dry night, frost in the air, the streets as clean as a ballroom floor, the lamps unshaken by any wind, drawing a regular pattern of light and shadow. By 10 o'clock, when the shops were closed, the by-street was very solitary and, in spite of the low growl of London from all round, very silent. Small sounds carried afar, domestic sounds out of the houses round very silent. The houses where the sounds were coming from were clearly audible on either side of the roadway, and the rumor of the approach of any passenger preceded him by a long time. Mr. Utterson had been some minutes at his post when he was aware of an odd light footstep drawing near. In the course of his nightly patrols, he had long grown accustomed to the quaint effect with which the footfalls of a single person, while he is still a great way off, suddenly spring out distant from the vast hum and clatter of the city. Yet his attention had never before been so sharply and so decisively arrested, and it was with a strong superstitious prevision of success that he withdrew into the entry of the court. The steps drew swiftly nearer, and swelled out suddenly louder as they turned the end of the street. The lawyer, looking forth from the entry of the court, could soon see what manner of man he had to deal with. He was small and very plainly dressed, and the look of him, even at that distance, went somehow strongly against the watcher's inclination. But he had made straight for the door, crossing the roadway to save time, and as he came he drew a key from his pocket, like one approaching home. Mr. Utterson stepped out and touched him on the shoulder as he passed. "Mr. Hyde, I think." Mr. Hyde shrank back with a hissing intake of the breath. But his fear was only momentary. And though he did not look the lawyer in the face, he answered coolly enough, "That is my name. What do you want?" "I see you are going in," returned the lawyer. "I am an old friend of Dr. Jekyll's, Mr. Utterson of Gaunt Street. You must have heard my name, and meeting you so conveniently, I thought you might admit me." "You will not find Dr. Jekyll. He is from home," replied Mr. Hyde, blowing in the key. And then suddenly, but still without looking up, "How did you know me?" he asked. "On your side," said Mr. Utterson. "Will you do me a favor?" "With pleasure," replied the other. "What shall it be?" "Will you let me see your face?" asked the lawyer. Mr. Hyde appeared to hesitate, and then, as if upon some sudden reflection, fronted about with an air of defiance, and the pair stared at each other pretty fixedly for a few seconds. "Now I shall know you again," said Mr. Utterson. "It may be useful." "Yes," returned Mr. Hyde. "It is as well we have met. And apropos, you should have my address." He gave a number of a street in Soho. "Good God," thought Mr. Utterson, "can he too have been thinking of the will?" But he kept his feelings to himself, and only grunted in acknowledgment of the address. "And now," said the other, "how did you know me?" "By description," was the reply. "Whose description?" "We have common friends," said Mr. Utterson. "Common friends," echoed Mr. Hyde a little hoarsely. "Who are they?" "Jekyll, for instance," said the lawyer. "He never told you," cried Mr. Hyde with a flush of anger. "I did not think you would have lied." "Come," said Mr. Utterson, "that is not fitting language." The other snarled aloud into a savage laugh, and the next moment, with extraordinary quickness, he had unlocked the door and disappeared into the house. The lawyer stood a while when Mr. Hyde had left him, the picture of disquietude. Then he began slowly to mount the street, pausing every step or two, and putting his hand to his brow like a man in mental perplexity. The problem he was thus debating as he walked was one of a class that is rarely solved. Mr. Hyde was pale and dwarfish. He gave an impression of deformity without any nameable malformation. He had a displeasing smile. He had borne himself to the lawyer with a sort of murderous mixture of timidity and boldness, and he spoke with a husky, whispering, and somewhat broken voice. All these were points against him, but not all of these together could explain the hitherto unknown disgust, loathing, and fear with which Mr. Utterson regarded him. "There must be something else," said the perplexed gentleman. "There is something more. If I could find a name for it, God bless me. The man seems hardly human. Something troglodytic, shall we say? Or can it be the old story of Dr. Fell? Or is it the mere radiance of a foul soul that thus transpires through the transfigures its clay continent? The last, I think, for, oh, my poor old Harry Jekyll, if ever I read Satan's signature upon a face, it was on that of your new friend." Round the corner from the by-street there was a square of ancient handsome houses, now for the most part decayed from their high estate, and let in flats and chambers to all sorts and conditions of men, map engravers, architects, shady lawyers, and the agents of obscure enterprises. One house, however, second from the corner, was still occupied entire, and at the door of this, which wore a great air of wealth and comfort, though it was now plunged in darkness except for the fanlight, Mr. Utterson stopped and knocked. A well-dressed elderly servant opened the door. "Is Dr. Jekyll at home, Poole?" asked the lawyer. "I will see Mr. Utterson," said Poole, admitting the visitor, as he spoke, into a large, low-roofed, comfortable hall paved with flags, warmed after the fashion of the country house, by a bright open fire, and furnished with costly cabinets of oak. "Will you wait here by the fire, sir, or shall I give you a light in the dining-room?" "Here, thank you," said the lawyer, and he drew near and leaned on the tall fender. This hall, in which he was now left alone, was a pet fancy of his friend the doctor's, and Utterson himself was wont to speak of it as the pleasantest room in London. But tonight there was a shudder in his blood. The face of Hyde sat heavy on the gloom of his spirits. It sat heavy on his memory. He felt, what was rare with him, a nausea and distaste of life, and in the gloom of his spirits he seemed to read a menace in the flickering of the firelight, on the polished cabinets, and the uneasy starting of the shadow on the roof. He was ashamed of his relief when Poole presently returned to announce that Dr. Jekyll was gone out. "I saw Mr. Hyde go in by the old dissecting-room door, Poole," he said. "Is that right, when Dr. Jekyll is from home?" "Quite right, Mr. Utterson, sir," replied the servant. "Mr. Hyde has a key." "Your master seems to repose a great deal of trust in that young man, Poole," resumed the other, musingly. "Yes, sir, he do indeed," said Poole. "We have all orders to obey him." "I do not think I ever met Mr. Hyde?" asked Utterson. "Oh dear no, sir, he never dines here," replied the butler. "Indeed, we see very little of him on this side of the house. He mostly comes and goes by the laboratory." "Well, good night, Poole." "Good night, Mr. Utterson." And the lawyer set out homeward with a very heavy heart. "Poor Harry Jekyll," he thought. "My mind misgives me he is in deep waters. He was wild when he was young, a long while ago to be sure, but in the law of God there is no nature of limitations. It must be that, the ghost of some old sin, the cancer of some concealed disgrace, punishment coming, pet grado, years after memory has forgotten, and self-love condoned the fault." And the lawyer, scared by the thought, brooded awhile on his own past, groping in all the corners of memory, lest by chance some jack-in-the-box of an old iniquity should leap to light there. His past was fairly blameless. Few men could read the rolls of their life with less apprehension. Yet he was humbled to the dust by the many ill things he had done, and raised up again into a sober and fearful gratitude by the many that he had come so near to doing, yet avoided. And then, by a return on his former subject, he conceived a spark of hope. "This Master Hyde, if he were studied," thought he, "must have secrets of his own, black secrets by the look of him, secrets compared to which poor Jekyll's worst would be like sunshine. Things cannot continue as they are. It turns me cold to think of this creature stealing like a thief to Harry's bedside. Poor Harry! What awakening! And the danger of it, for if this Hyde suspects the existence of the will, he may grow impatient to inherit. I must put my shoulder to the will, if Jekyll will but let me," he added. "If Jekyll will only let me." For once more he saw before his mind's eye, as clear as a transparency, the strange clauses of the will. Chapter 3. Dr. Jekyll was quite at ease. A fortnight later, by excellent good fortune, the doctor gave one of his pleasant dinners to some 5 or 6 old cronies, all intelligent, reputable men, and all judges of good wine, and Mr. Utterson so contrived that he remained behind after the others had departed. This was no new arrangement, but a thing that had befallen many scores of times. Where Utterson was liked, he was liked well. Host loved to entertain the dry lawyer. When the light-hearted and the loose-tongued had already their foot on the threshold, they liked to sit a while in his unobtrusive company, practicing for solitude, sobering their minds in the man's rich silence, after the expense and strain of gaiety. To this rule, Dr. Jekyll was no exception, and as he now sat on the opposite side of the fire, a large, well-made, smooth-faced man of 50, with something of a slyish cast perhaps, but every mark of capacity and kindness, you could see by his looks that he cherished Mr. Utterson a sincere and warm affection. "I have been wanting to speak to you, Jekyll," began the latter. "You know that will of yours." A close observer might have gathered that the topic was distasteful, but the doctor carried it off gaily. "My poor Utterson," said he, "you are unfortunate in such a client. I never saw a man so distressed as you were by my will, unless it were that Hyde-bound pendant Lanyon, at what he called my scientific heresies. Oh, I know. He's a good fellow. You needn't frown. An excellent fellow, and I always mean to see more of him. But a hide-bound pendant for all that, an ignorant, blatant pendant. I was never more disappointed in any man than Lanyon." "You know, I never approved of it," pursued Utterson, ruthlessly disregarding the fresh topic. "My will? Yes, certainly I know that," said the doctor, a trifle sharply. "You have told me so." "Well, I tell you so again," continued the lawyer. "I've been learning something of young Hyde." The large, handsome face of Dr. Jekyll grew pale to the very lips, and there came a blackness about his eyes. "I do not care to hear more," said he. "This is a matter I thought we had agreed to drop." "What I heard was abominable," said Utterson. "It can make no change. You do not understand my position," returned the doctor with a certain incoherency of manner. "I am painfully situated. Utterson, my position is a very strange one. It is one of those affairs that cannot be mended by talking." "Jekyll," said Utterson, "you know me. I am a man to be trusted. Make a clear breast of this confidence, and I make no doubt I can get you out of it." "My good Utterson," said the doctor, "this is very good of you. This is downright good of you, and I cannot find words to thank you in. I believe you fully. I would trust you before any man alive, aye, before myself, if I could make the choice, but indeed, it isn't what you fancy. It is not so bad as that. And just to put your good heart at rest, I will tell you one thing. The moment I choose, I can be rid of Mr. Hyde. I give you my hand upon that. And I thank you again and again. And I will just add one little word, Utterson, that I'm sure you'll take in good part. This is a private matter, and I beg of you to let it sleep." Utterson reflected a little, looking in the fire. "I have no doubt you are perfectly right," he said at last, getting to his feet. "Well, but since we have touched upon this business, and for the last time, I hope," continued the doctor, "there is one point I should like you to understand. I have really a very great interest in poor Hyde. I know you have seen him. He told me so, and I fear he was rude. But I do sincerely take a very great interest in that young man. And if I am taken away, Utterson, I wish you to promise me that you will bear with him and get his rights for him. I think you would if you knew all, and it would be a weight off of my mind if you would promise." "I can't pretend that I shall ever like him," said the lawyer. "I don't ask that," replied Jekyll, laying his hand upon the other's arm. "I only ask for justice. I only ask you to help him for my sake, when I am no longer here." Utterson heaved an irrepressible sigh. "Well," said he, "I promise."
Delivery from Floyd.
Can you put it in the fridge for me, please?
Yes.
Thank you. Chapter 4. The Carew Murder Case. Nearly a year later, in the month of October 18, London was startled by a crime of singular ferocity, and rendered all the more notable by the high position of the victim. The details were few and startling. A maidservant living alone in a house not far from the river had gone upstairs to bed about 11. Although a fog rolled over the city in the small hours, the early part of the night was cloudless, and the lane, which the maid's window overlooked, was brilliantly lit by the full moon. It seems she was romantically given, for she sat down upon her box, which stood immediately under the window, and fell into a dream of musing. Never, she used to say with streaming tears when she narrated that experience, never had she felt more at peace with all men, or thought more kindly of the world. And as she sat along the lane, and advancing to meet him, another and very small gentleman, to whom at first she paid less attention. When they had come within speech, which was just under the maid's eyes, the older man bowed and accosted the other with a very pretty manner of politeness. It did not seem as if the subject of his address were of great importance. Indeed, from his pointing it sometimes appeared as if he were only inquiring his way. But the moon shone on his face as he spoke, and the girl was pleased to watch it. It seemed to breathe such an innocent and old-world kindness of disposition, yet with something high, too, as of a well-founded self-continence. Presently her eye wandered to the other, and she was surprised to recognize in him a certain Mr. Hyde, who had once visited her master, and from whom she had conceived a dislike. He had in his hand a heavy cane, with which was trifling, but he answered never a word, and seemed to listen with an ill-contained impatience. And then all of a sudden he broke out in a great flame of anger, stamping with his foot, brandishing the cane, and carrying on, as the maid described it, like a madman. The gentleman took a step back, with the air of one very much surprised and a trifle hurt. And at that Mr. Hyde broke out of all bounds, and clubbed him to the earth. The next moment, with ape-like fury, he was trampling his victim underfoot, and hailing down a storm of blows, under which the bones were audibly shattered, and the body jumped upon the roadway. At the horror of these sights and sounds, the maid fainted. It was 2 o'clock when she came to herself and called for the police. The murderer was gone long ago, but there lay his victim in the middle of the lane, incredibly mangled. The stick with which the deed had been done, although it was of some rare and very tough and heavy wood, had broken in the middle under the stress of this insensate cruelty, and one splintered half had rolled in the neighboring gutter. The other, without doubt, had been carried away by the murderer, A purse and a gold watch were found upon the victim, but no cards or papers except a sealed and stamped envelope, which he had been probably carrying to the post, and which bore the name and address of Mr. Utterson. This was brought to the lawyer the next morning, before he was out of bed, and he had no sooner seen it and been told the circumstances than he shot out a solemn lip. "I shall say nothing till I have seen the body," said he. "This may be very serious. Have the kindness to wait while I dress." And with the same grave countenance, he hurried through his breakfast and drove to the police station, whither the body had been carried. As soon as he came into the cell, he nodded. "Yes," said he, "I recognize him. I am sorry to say that this is Sir Danvers Carew." "Good God, sir!" exclaimed the officer, "is it possible?" And the next moment his eye lighted up with professional ambition. "This will make a deal of noise," he said, "and perhaps you can help us to the man." And he briefly narrated what the maid had seen and showed the broken stick. Mr. Utterson had already quailed at the name of Hyde, but when the stick was laid before him, he could doubt no longer. Broken and battered as it was, he recognized it for one that he had himself presented many years before the Henry Jekyll. "Is this Mr. Hyde a person of small stature?" he inquired. "Particularly small and particularly wicked-looking, is what the maid calls him," said the officer. Mr. Utterson reflected, and then, raising his head, "If you will come with me in the cab," he said, "I think I can take you to his house." It was by this time about 9 in the morning, and the first fog of the season. A great chocolate-colored pall lowered over heaven, but the wind was continually charging and routing these embattled vapors, so that as the cab crawled from street to street, Mr. Utterson beheld a marvelous number of degrees and hues of the twilight. For here it would be dark like the back end of evening, and there would be a glow of a rich, lurid brown, like the light of some strange conflagration. And here, for a moment, the fog would be quite broken up, and a haggard shaft of daylight would glance in between the swirling wreaths. The dismal quarter of Soho, seen under these changing glimpses, with its muddy ways and slatternly passengers, and its lamps, which had never been extinguished on or had been kindled afresh to combat this mournful reinvasion of darkness, seemed, in the lawyer's eyes, like a district of some city in a nightmare. The thoughts of his mind, besides, were of the gloomiest dye, and when he glanced at the companion of his drive, he was conscious of some touch of that terror of the law and the law's officers which may at times assail the most honest. As the cab drew up before the address indicated, the fog lifted a little and showed him a dingy street, a gin palace, a low French eating-house, a shop for the retail of penny numbers and two-penny salads, many ragged children huddled in the doorways, and many women of many different nationalities passing out, key in hand, to have a morning glass. And the next moment the fog settled down again upon that part, as brown as umber, and cut him off from his blackguardly surroundings. This was the home of Henry Jekyll's favorite, a man who was heir to 250,000 sterling. An ivory-faced and silvery-haired old woman opened the door. She had an evil face, smoothed by hypocrisy, but her manners were excellent. Yes, she said, this was Mr. Hyde's, but he was not at home. He had been in that very night, very late, but had gone away again in less than an hour. There was nothing strange in that. His habits were very irregular, and he was often absent. For instance, it was nearly 2 months since she had seen him till yesterday. "Very well, then, we wish to see his rooms," said the lawyer, and when the woman began to declare it was impossible, I'd better tell you who this person is," he added. "This is Inspector Newcomen of Scotland Yard." A flash of odious joy appeared upon the woman's face. "Ah," said she, "he is in trouble. What has he done?" Mr. Utterson and the inspector exchanged glances. "He don't seem a very popular character," observed the latter. "And now, my good woman, just let me and this gentleman have a look about us." In the whole extent of the house, which but for the old woman remained otherwise empty, Mr. Hyde had only used a couple of rooms, but these were furnished with luxury and good taste. A closet was filled with wine, the plate was of silver, the napery elegant, a good picture hung upon the walls. A gift, as Utterson supposed, from Henry Jekyll, who was much of a connoisseur, and the carpets were of many plies and agreeable in color. At this moment, however, the rooms bore every mark of having been recently and hurriedly ransacked. Clothes lay about the floor, with their pockets inside out. Lockfast drawers stood open, and on the hearth there lay a pile of grey ashes, as though many papers had been burned. From these embers the inspector disinterred the butt end of a green cheque-book, which had resisted the action of the fire. The other half of the stick was found behind the door, and as this clinched his suspicions, the officer declared himself delighted. A visit to the bank, where several £1,000s were found to be lying to the murderer's credit, completed his gratification. "You may depend on it, sir," he told Mr. Utterson. "I have him in my hand. He must have lost his head, or he never would have left the stick, or, above all, burned the cheque-book. Why, money's life to the man. We have nothing to do but wait for him at the bank and get out the handbills." On his way out, the lawyer stopped and had a word or two with Poole. "By the by," said he, "there was a letter handed in today. What was the messenger like?" But Poole was positive nothing had come except by post. "And only circulars by that," he added. This news sent off the visitors with his fears renewed. Plainly, the letter had come by the laboratory door. Possibly, indeed, it had been written in the cabinet, and, if that were so, it must be differently judged and handled with more caution. The newsboys, as he went, were crying themselves hoarse along the footways. "Special edition, shocking murder of an MP." That was the funeral oration of one friend and client, and he could not help a certain apprehension lest the good name of another should be sucked down the eddy of the scandal. It was, at least, a ticklish decision that he had to make, and, self-reliant as he was by habit, he began to cherish a longing of advice. It was not to be had directly, but perhaps, he thought, it might be fished for. Presently, after he sat on one side of his own hearth, with Mr. Guest, his head clerk, upon the other, and midway between, at a nicely calculated distance from the fire, a bottle of a particular old wine that had long dwelt unsunned in the foundations of his house. The fog still slept on the wing above the drowned city, where the lamps glimmered like carbuncles, and through the muffle and smother of these fallen clouds, the procession of the town's life was still rolling in through the great arteries, with a sound of the mighty wind. But the room was gay with firelight. In the bottle the acids were long ago resolved. The imperial dye had softened with time as the color grows richer in stained windows, and the glow of hot autumn afternoons on hillside vineyards was ready to be set free, and to disperse the fogs of London. Insensibly the lawyer melted. There was no man from whom he had kept fewer secrets than Mr. Guest, and he was not always sure that he kept as many as he meant. Guest had often been on business to the doctor's. He knew Poole. He could scarce have failed to hear of Mr. Hyde's familiarity about the house. He might, draw conclusions. Was it not as well, then, that he should see a letter which put that mystery to rights? And above all, since Guest, being a great student and critic of handwriting, would consider the step natural and obliging. The clerk, besides, was a man of counsel. He would scarce read so strange a document without dropping a remark, and by that remark Mr. Utterson might shape his future course. "This is a sad business about Sir Danvers," he said. "Yes, sir, indeed. It was elicited a great deal of public feeling," returned Guest. "The man, of course, was mad." "I should like to hear your views on that," replied Utterson. "I have a document here in his handwriting. It is between ourselves, for I scarce know what to do about it. It is an ugly business at the best, but there it is, quite in your way, a murderer's autograph." Guest's eyes brightened, and he sat down at once and studied it with passion. "No, sir," he said, "not mad, but it is an odd hand." "And by all accounts a very odd writer," added the lawyer. Just then the servant entered with a note. "Is that from Dr. Jekyll, sir?" inquired the clerk. "I thought I knew the writing. Anything private, Mr. Utterson?" "Only an invitation to dinner. Why, do you want to see it?" "One moment, I thank you, sir," and the clerk laid the 2 sheets of paper alongside and sedulously compared their contents. "Thank you, sir," he said at last, returning both. "His very interesting autograph." There was a pause, during which Mr. Utterson struggled with himself. "Why did you compare them, Guest?" he inquired suddenly. "Well, sir," returned the clerk, "there is a rather singular resemblance. The 2 hands are in many points identical, only differently sloped." "Rather quaint," said Utterson. "It is, as you say, rather quaint," returned Guest. "I wouldn't speak of this note, you know," said the master. "No, sir," said the clerk, "I understand." But no sooner was Mr. Utterson alone that night than he locked the note into his safe, where it reposed from the time forward. "What," he thought, "Henry Jekyll forge for a murderer?" And his blood ran cold in his veins. I believe this is chapter 6. There I go with my... actually, it's chapter 4. Remarkable Incident of Dr. Lanyon. Time ran on. Thousands of pounds were offered in reward for the death of Sir Danvers, was resented as a public injury. But Mr. Hyde had disappeared out of the ken of the police as though he had never existed. Much of his past was unearthed indeed, and all disreputable. Tales came out of the man's cruelty, at once so callous and violent, of his vile life, of his strange associates, of the hatred that seemed to have surrounded his career, but of his present whereabouts, not a whisper. From the time he had left the house in Soho in the morning of the murder, he was simply blotted out, and gradually, as time drew on, Mr. Utterson began to recover from the hotness of his alarm, and to grow more quiet with himself. The death of Sir Danvers was, to his way of thinking, more than paid for by the disappearance of Mr. Hyde. Now that evil influence had been withdrawn, a new life began for Dr. Jekyll. He came out of his seclusion, renewed relations with his friends, became once more their familiar guest and entertainer, and whilst he had always been known for charities, he is now no less distinguished for religion. He was busy, he was much in the open air, he did good. His face seemed to open and brighten, and, as if with an inward consciousness of service, and for more than 2 months the doctor was at peace. On the 8th of January, Utterson had dined at the doctor's with a great a small party. Lanyon had been there, and the face of the host had looked from one to the other, as in the old days when the trio were inseparable friends. On the 12th and again on the 14th, the door was shut against the lawyer. The doctor was confined to the house, Bull said, and saw no one. On the 15th he tried again and was again refused, and having now been used for the last 2 months to see his friend almost daily, he found this return of solitude to weigh upon his spirits. The 5th night he had a guest to dine with him, and the 6th he betook himself to Dr. Lanyon's. There, at least, he was not denied admittance, but when he came in, he was shocked at the change which had taken place in the doctor's appearance. He had his death warrant written legibly upon his face. The rosy man had grown pale, his flesh had fallen away. He was visibly balder and older, and yet it was not so much these tokens of a swift physical decay that arrested the lawyer's notice, as a look in the eye and quality of manner that seemed to testify to some deep-seated terror of mind. It was unlikely that the doctor should fear death, and yet that was what Utterson was tempered to suspect. Yes, he thought, he is a doctor. He must know his own state, and that his days are counted, and the knowledge is more than he can bear. And yet, Mr. Utterson remarked in his little books, it was with an air of great firmness that Leighton declared himself a doomed man. I have had a shock, he said, and I shall never recover. It is a question of weeks. Well, life has been pleasant. I liked it. Yes, sir, I used to like it. I sometimes think, if we knew all, we should be more glad to get away. Jekyll is ill too, observed Utterson. Have you seen him? But Lanyon's face changed, and he held up a trembling hand. I wish to see or hear no more of Dr. Jekyll, he said, in a loud, unsteady voice. I am quite done with that person, and I beg that you will spare me any allusion to one whom I regard as dead. Tut, tut, said Mr. Utterson, and then after a considerable pause, can't I do anything he required? We are 3 very old friends, Lanyon. We shall not live to many others. Nothing can be done, returned Lanyon. Ask himself. He will not see me, said the lawyer. I am not surprised at that, was the reply. Some day, Utterson, after I am dead, you may perhaps come to learn the right and wrong of this. I cannot tell you, and in the meantime, if you can sit and talk with me of other things, for God's sake, stay and do so. But if you cannot keep clear of this accursed topic, then in God's name go, for I cannot bear it. As soon as he got home, Utterson sat down and wrote to Jekyll, complaining of his exclusion from his house, and asking the cause of this unhappy break with Lanyon. And the next day brought him a long answer, often very pathetically worded, and sometimes darkly mysterious in drift. The quarrel with Lanyon was incurable. I do not blame our old friend, Jekyll wrote, but I share his view that we must never meet. I mean, from henceforth, to lead a life of extreme seclusion. You must not be surprised, nor must you doubt that my friendship, if my door is often shut even to you. You must suffer me to go my own dark way. I have brought on myself a punishment and a danger that I cannot name. If I am the chief of sinners, I am the chief of sufferers also. I could not think that this earth contained a place for sufferings and terror so unmanning. And you can do but one thing, Utterson, to lighten this density, and that is to respect my silence. Utterson was amazed. The dark influence of Hyde had been withdrawn. The doctor had returned to his old tasks and amenities. A week ago the prospect had smiled with every promise of a cheerful and an honored age, and now, in a moment, friendship and peace of mind and the whole tenor of his life were wrecked. So great and unprepared a change pointed to madness. But in view of Lanyon's manner and words, there must lie for it some deeper ground. A week afterwards, Dr. Lanyon took to his bed, and in something less than a fortnight he was dead. The night after the funeral, at which he had been sadly affected, Utterson locked the door of his business room, and sitting there by the light of a melancholy candle, drew out and set before him an envelope addressed by the hand and sealed with the seal of his dead friend. Private, for the hands of J.G. Utterson, alone, and in case of his predecease to be destroyed unread. So it was emphatically subscribed, and the lawyer dreaded to behold the contents. I have buried one friend today, he thought. What if this should cost me another? And then he condemned the fear of his disloyalty and broke the seal. Within there was another enclosure, likewise sealed, and marked upon the cover was not to be opened till the death or disappearance of Dr. Henry Jekyll. Dr. Utterson could not trust his eyes, yet it was disappearance. Here again, as in the Mad Will, which he had long ago restored to its author, here again were the idea of the disappearance and the name of Henry Jekyll bracketed. But in the will, the idea had sprung from the sinister suggestion of the man Hyde. It was set there with a purpose all too plain and horrible. Written by the hand of Lanyon. What should it mean? Great curiosity came to the trustee to disregard the prohibition and dive at once to the bottom of these mysteries, but professional honor and faith to his dead friend were stringent obligations, and the packet slept in the innermost corner of his private safe. It is one thing to mortify curiosity, another to conquer it, and it may be doubted if, from that day forth, Utterson desired the society of his surviving friend with the same eagerness. He thought of him kindly, but his thoughts were disquieted and fearful. He went to call indeed, but he was perhaps relieved to be denied admittance. Perhaps in his heart he preferred to speak to Poole upon the doorstep. And surrounded by the air and sounds of the open city, rather than to be admitted into the house of voluntary bondage, and to sit and speak with its inscrutable recluse. Poole had, indeed, no very pleasant news to communicate. The doctor, it appeared, now more than ever confined himself to the cabinet over the laboratory, where he would sometimes even sleep. He was out of spirits. He had grown very silent. He did not read. It seemed as if he had something on his mind. Utterson became so used to the unvarying character of these reports that he fell off little by little in the frequency of his visits. Well, on that note, boys and girls, we are going to go to our first music break. So on this break, we have Miss Mia Savage with her group Antidote for Savages with Your Skeleton, our new reality, Let Me Be Your Home, and Lemurian Crypto. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this music break. Welcome back, and thank you so much for joining us this evening on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. This evening, we are going to be reading from Robert Louis Stevenson's Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Incident at the Window. It chanced on Sunday, when Mr. Utterson was on his usual walk with Mr. Enfield, that their way lay once again through the by-street, and that, when they came in front of the door, both stopped to gaze on it. "Well," said Enfield, "that story's at an end, at least. We shall never see more of Mr. Hyde." "I hope not," said Utterson. "Did I ever tell you that I once saw him and shared your feeling of repulsion?" "It was impossible to do the one without the other," returned Enfield. "And, by the way, what an ass you must have thought me not to know that this was a back way to Dr. Jekyll's. It was partly your own fault that I found it out, even when I did." "So you found it out, did you?" said Utterson. "But if that be so, we may step into the court and take a look at the windows. To tell you the truth, I am uneasy about poor Jekyll, and even outside I feel as if the presence of a friend might do him good." The court was very cool and a little damp, and full of premature twilight, although the sky, high up overhead, was still bright with sunset. The middle one of the 3 windows was halfway open, and sitting close beside it, taking the air with an infinite sadness of mien, like some disconsolate prisoner, Utterson saw Dr. Jekyll. "What, Jekyll!" he cried. "I trust you are better." "I am very low, Utterson," replied the doctor drearily. "Very low. It will not last long, thank God." "You stay too much indoors," said the lawyer. "You should be out, whipping up the circulation, like Mr. Enfield and me." "This is my cousin, Mr. Enfield, Dr. Jekyll. Come now, get your hat and take a quick turn with us." "You are very good," sighed the other. "I should like to very much, but no. It is quite impossible. I dare not. But indeed, Utterson, I am very glad to see you. This is really a great pleasure. I would ask you and Mr. Enfield up, but the place is really not fit." "Why, then," said the lawyer good-naturedly, "the best thing we can do is stay down here and speak with you from where we are." "That is just what I was about to venture to propose," returned the doctor, with a smile. But the words were hardly uttered before the smile was struck out of his face and succeeded by an expression of such abject terror and despair as froze the very blood of the 2 gentlemen below. They saw it but for a glimpse, for the window was instantly thrust down, but that glimpse was and had been sufficient, and they turned and left the court without a word. In silence, too, they traversed by the street, and it was not until they had come into the neighboring thoroughfare, where even upon a Sunday there were still some stringes of life, that Mr. Utterson at last turned and looked at his companion. They were both pale, and there was an answering horror in their eyes. God forgive us," said Mr. Utterson. But Mr. Enfield only nodded his head very seriously and walked on once more in silence. Chapter 8. The Last Night. Mr. Utterson was sitting by his fireside one evening after dinner, when he was surprised to receive a visit from Poole. "Bless me, Poole, what brings you here?" he cried, and then taking a second look at him, "What ails you?" he added. "Is the doctor ill?" "Mr. Utterson," said the man, "there is something wrong." "Take a seat, and here is a glass of wine for you," said the lawyer. "Now take your time and tell me plainly what you want." "You know the doctor's ways, sir," replied Poole, "and how he shuts himself up. Well, he's shut up again in the cabinet, and I don't like it, sir." I wish I may die if I like it, Mr. Utterson, sir, I'm afraid. Now, my good man, said the lawyer, be explicit. What are you afraid of? I've been very afraid for about a week, returned Poole, doggedly disregarding the question, and I can bear it no more. The man's appearance amply bore out his words. His manner was altered for the worse, and except for the moment when he had first announced his terror, he had not once looked the lawyer in the face. Even now he sat with a glass of wine untasted on his knee, and his eyes directed to a corner of the floor. I can bear it no more, he repeated. Come, said the lawyer. I see you have some good reason, Poole. I see there is something seriously amiss. Try to tell me what it is. I think there's been foul play, said Poole hoarsely. Foul play? Cried the lawyer, a good deal frightened and rather inclined to be irritated in consequence. What foul play? What does the man mean? I daren't say, sir, was the answer, but will you come along with me and see for yourself? Mr. Utterson's only answer was to rise and get his hat and great coat, but he observed with wonder the greatness of the relief that appeared upon the butler's face, and perhaps with no less, that the wine was still untasted when he set it down to follow. It was a wild, cold, seasonable night of March, with a pale moon lying on her back as though the wind had tilted her, in a flying rack of the most sphaneous and lawny texture. The wind made talking difficult, and flecked the blood into the face. It seemed to have swept the street unusually bare of passengers, besides, for Mr. Utterson thought he had never seen that part of London so deserted. He could have wished it otherwise. Never in his life had he been conscious of so sharp a wish to see and touch his fellow creatures. For struggle as he might, there was borne in upon his mind a crushing anticipation of calamity. This square, when they got there, was all full of wind and dust, and the thin trees in the garden were lashing themselves along the railing. Poole, who had kept all the way a pace or two ahead, now pulled up in the middle of the pavement, and in spite of the biting weather, took off his hat and mopped his brow with a red pocket handkerchief. But for all the hurry of his coming, these were not the dews of exertion that he wiped away, but the moisture of some strangling anguish, for his face was white, and his voice, when he spoke, harsh and broken. Well, sir, he said, here we are, and God grant there be nothing wrong. Amen, Poole, said the lawyer. Thereupon the servant knocked on a very guarded manner. The door was opened on the chain, and the voice asked from within, Is that you, Poole? It's all right, said Poole. Open the door. The hall, when they entered, was brightly lighted up. The fire was built high, and about the hearth the whole of the servants, men and women, stood huddled together like a flock of sheep. At the sight of Mr. Utterson, the housemaid broke into hysterical whimpering, and the cook, crying out, God bless! Mr. Utterson, ran forward as if to take him in her arms. What? Are you all here? Said the lawyer peevishly. Very irregular, very unseemly. Your master would be far from pleased. They're all afraid, said Poole. Blank silence followed, no one protesting. Only the maid lifted up her voice, and now wept loudly. Hold your tongue, Poole said to her with a ferocity of accent that testified his own jangled nerves. And indeed, when the girl had so suddenly raised the note of her lamentation, they had all started and turned towards the inner door with faces of dreadful expectation. And now, continued the butler, addressing the knife boy, reach me a candle, and we'll get this through hands at once. And then he begged Mr. Utterson to follow him, and led the way to the back garden. Now, sir, said he, you come, as gently as you can. I want you to hear, and I don't want you to be heard. And see here, sir, if by any chance he was to ask you in, don't go. Mr. Utterson's nerves, at this unlooked-for termination, gave a jerk that nearly threw him from his balance, but he recollected his courage and followed the butler into the laboratory building and through the surgical theater, with its lumber of crates and bottles, to the foot of the stair. Here, Poole mentioned him to stand on one side and listen, while he himself, setting down the candle and making a great and obvious call on his resolution, mounted the steps and knocked with a somewhat uncertain hand on the bed vase of the cabinet door. "Mr. Utterson, sir, asking to see you," he called, and even as he did so, once more violently signed to the lawyer to give ear. A voice answered from within. "Tell him I cannot see anyone," it said complainingly. "Thank you, sir," said Poole, with a note of something like triumph in his voice. And taking up his candle, he led Mr. Utterson back across the yard and into the great kitchen, where the fire was out and the beetles were leaping on the floor. "Sir," he said, looking Mr. Utterson in the eyes, "was that my master's voice?" "It seems much changed," replied the lawyer, very pale but giving look for look. "Changed? Well, yes, I think so," said the butler. "Have I been 20 years in this man's house to be deceived about his voice? No, sir. Master's made away with. He was made away with 8 days ago, when we heard him cry out upon the name of God. And who's in there instead of him, and why it stays there, is a thing that cries to heaven, Mr. Utterson." "This is a very strange tale, Poole. This is rather a wild tale, my man," said Mr. Utterson, biting his finger. "Suppose it were as you suppose, supposing Dr. Jekyll to have been, well, murdered? What could induce the murderer to stay? That won't hold water. It doesn't commend itself to reason." "Well, Mr. Utterson, you are a hard man to satisfy, but I'll do it yet," said Poole. "All this last week, you must know, him or not, or whatever it is that lives in that cabinet, has been crying night and day for some sort of medicine, and cannot get it to his mind. It was sometimes his way, the master's that is, to write his orders on a sheet of paper and throw it on the stair. We've had nothing else this week back, nothing but papers, and a closed door, and the very mills left there to be smuggled in when nobody is looking. Well, sir, every day and twice and thrice, in this same day, there have been orders and complaints, and I've been sent flying to all the wholesale chemists in town. Every time I brought back the stuff, there would be another paper telling me to return it, because it was not pure, and another order to a different firm. This drug is wanted bitter bad, sir, whatever for." "Have you any of these papers?" asked Mr. Utterson. Poole felt in his pocket and handed out a crumpled note, which the lawyer, bending near to the candle, carefully examined. Its contents ran thus: "Dr. Jekyll presents his compliments to Masters Ma. He assures them that the last sample is impure and quite useless for his present purpose. In the year 18 whatever the heck it is, Dr. J purchased a somewhat large quantity for Messrs. M. He now begs them to search with the most sedulous care, and should any of the same quality be left, to forward it to him at once. Expense is no consideration." The importance of this to Dr. J can hardly be exaggerated. So far, the letter had run composedly enough, but here, with a sudden splutter of the pen, the writer's emotion had broken loose. "For God's sake," he had added, "find me some of the old." "This is a strange note," said Mr. Utterson, and then sharply, "How do you come to have it open?" "The man at Ma's was main angry, sir, and he threw it back to me like so much dirt," returned Poole. "This is unquestionably the doctor's hand, do you know?" resumed the lawyer. "I thought it looked like it," said the servant, rather sulkily, and then, with another voice, "But what matters handwrite?" he said. "I've seen him." "Seen him?" repeated Mr. Utterson. "Well." "That's it," said Poole. "It was this way. I came suddenly into the theater from the garden. It seems he had slipped out to look for his drug, or whatever it is, for the cabinet door was open, and there he was at the far end of the room, digging among the crates. He looked up when I came in, gave a kind of cry, and went upstairs into the cabinet. It was but for a minute that I saw him, but the hair stood up upon my head like quills. Sir, if that was my master, why had he a mask upon his face? If it was my master, why did he cry like a rat and run from me? I have served him long enough, and then the man paused and passed his hand over his face. These are all very strange circumstances, said Mr. Utterson. But I think I begin to see daylight. Your master, Poole, is plainly seized with one of those melodies that both torture and deform the sufferer, hence, for aught I know, the alteration of his voice, hence, the mask and his avoidance of his friends, hence, his eagerness to find this drug, by means of which the poor soul retains some hope of ultimate recovery. God grant that he be not deceived. There is my explanation. It is sad enough, Poole, and appalling to consider, but it is plain and natural, hangs well together, and delivers us from all exorbitant alarms. Sir, said the butler, turning to a sort of mottled collar, that thing was not my master, and there's the truth. My master, here he looked round him and began to whisper, is a tall, fine build of a man, and this was more of a dwarf. Utterson attempted to protest. Oh, sir, cried Poole, do you think I do not know my master after 20 years? Do you think I do not know where his head comes to in the cabinet door, where I saw him every morning of my life? No, sir, that thing in the mask was never Dr. Jekyll. God knows what it was, but it was never Dr. Jekyll, and it is the belief of my heart that there was murder done. Poole, replied the lawyer, if you say that, it will become my duty to make certain. Much as I desire to spare your master's feeling, much as I puzzled about this note, which seems to prove him to be still alive, I shall consider it my duty to break in that door. Mr. Utterson that's talking, cried the butler. And now comes the second question, resumed Utterson. Who is going to do it? Why, you and me, sir, was the undaunted reply. That is very well said, returned the lawyer. And whatever comes of it, I shall make it my business to see you are no loser. There is an axe in the theater, continued Poole, and you might take the kitchen poker for yourself. The lawyer took that rude but weighty instrument into his hand, and balanced it. Do you know, Poole, he said, looking up, that you and I are about to place ourselves in a position of some peril? You may say so, sir, indeed, returned the butler. It is well, then, that we should be frank, said the other. We both think more than we have said. Let us make a clean breast. This masked figure that you saw, did you recognize it? Well, sir, it went so quick, and the creature was so doubled up, that I could hardly swear to that, was the answer. But if you mean, was it Mr. Hyde? Why, yes, I think it was. You see, it was much of the same bigness, and it had the same quick light way with it, and then who ease could have got in by laboratory door. You have not forgot, sir, that at the time of the murder he had still the key with him. But that's not all. I don't know, Mr. Utterson, if ever you met this Mr. Hyde. Yes, said the lawyer, I once spoke to him. Then you must know, as well as the rest of us, that there was something queer about the gentleman, something that gave a man a turn. I don't know rightly how to say it, sir, beyond this, that you felt it in your marrow, kind of cold and thin. I own I felt something of what you describe, said Mr. Utterson. Quite so, sir, returned Poole. Well, when that masked thing like a monkey jumped from among the chemicals and whipped into the cabinet, it went down my spine like ice. Oh, I know it's evidence, Mr. Utterson. I'm book-learned enough for that, but a man has his feelings, and I give you my Bible word, it was Mr. Hyde. Aye, aye, said the lawyer. My fears inclined the same point. Evil, I fear, founded. Evil was sure to come of that connection. I believe you. I believe poor Harry is killed, and I believe his murderer, for what purpose God alone can tell, is still lurking in his victim's room. Well, let our name be Vengeance. Call Bradshaw. The footman came at the summons, very white and nervous. Pull yourself together, Bradshaw, said the lawyer. This suspense, I know, is telling upon all of you, but it is now our intention to make an end of it. Poole, here and I are going to force our way into the cabinet. If all is well, my shoulders are broad enough to bear the blame. Meanwhile, lest anything should really be amiss or any malefactor seek to escape by back, you and the boy must go round the corner with a pair of good sticks and take your post at the laboratory door. We give you 10 minutes to get to your stations. As Bradshaw left, the lawyer looked at his watch. And now, Poole, let us go to ours, he said. And taking the poker under his arm, he led the way into the yard. The scud had banked over the moon, and it was now quite dark. The wind, which only broke in puffs and draughts into the deep well of the building, tossed the light of the candle to and fro about their steps, until they came into the shelter of the theatre, where they sat down silently to wait. London hummed solemnly all around, but near at hand the stillness was only broken by the sound of a footfall moving to and fro along the cabinet door. So it will walk all day, sir, whispered Poole. Aye, in the better part of the night. Only when a new sample comes from the chemist there's a bit of a break. Ah, it's an ill conscience that's such an enemy to rest. Ah, sir, there's blood foully shed in every step of it, but hark again, a little closer. Put your heart in your ears, Mr. Utterson, and tell me, is that the doctor's foot? The steps fell lightly and oddly with a certain swing, for all they went so slowly. It was different indeed from the heavy creaking tread of Henry Jekyll. Utterson sighed. Is there never anything else? He asked. Poole nodded. Once, he said, once I heard it weeping. Weeping? How that? Said the lawyer, conscious of a sudden chill of horror. Weeping like a woman or a lost soul, said the butler. I came away with that upon my heart, and I could have wept too. But now the 10 minutes drew to an end. Poole disinterred the axe from under the stack of packing straw. The candle was set upon the nearest table to light them to the attack, and they drew near with bated breath to where the patient foot was still going up and down, in the quiet of the night. Jekyll! Cried Utterson with a loud voice. I demand to see you. He paused a moment, but there came no reply. I give you fair warning. Our suspicions are aroused, and I must and shall see you, he resumed. If not by fair means, then by foul. If not of your consent, they by brute force. Utterson, said the voice, for God's sake, have mercy. Ah, that's not Jekyll's voice, that's Hyde's, cried Utterson. Down with the door, Poole. Poole swung the axe over his shoulder. The blow shook the building, and the red baize door leaped against the lock and hinges. A dismal screech, as of mere animal terror, rang from the cabinet. Up went the axe again, and again the panels crashed, and the frame bounded. 4 times the blow fell, but the wood was tough, and the fittings of excellent workmanship, and it was not until the 5th that the lock suddenly burst in sunder, and the wreck of the door fell inwards on the carpet. The besiegers, appalled by their own right and stillness that had succeeded, stood back a little and peered in. There lay the cabinet door before their eyes, in the quiet lamplight, a good fire glowing and chattering on the hearth, the kettle singing its thin strain, a drawer or two open, papers neatly set forth on the business table, and near the fire the things laid out for tea. The quietest room, you would have said, and, but for the glazed presses full of chemicals, the most commonplace that night in London. Right in the midst there lay the body of a man sorely contorted and still twitching. They drew near on tiptoe, turned it on its back, and beheld the face of Edward Hyde. He was dressed in clothes far too large for him, clothes of the doctor's bigness. The cords of his face still moved with a resemblance of life, but life was quite gone, and by the crushed phial in the hand, and the strong smell of kernels that hung upon the air, Utterson knew that he was looking on the body of the self-destroyer. "We have come too late," he said sternly. "Whether to save or punish, Hyde is gone to his account, and it only remains for us to find the body of your master." The far greater proportion of the building was occupied by the theater, which filled almost the whole ground story, and was lighted from above, and by the cabinet, which formed an upper story at one end and looked upon the court. A corridor joined the theater to the door on the by-street, and with this, the cabinet communicated separately by a second flight of stairs. There were besides a few dark closets and spacious cellar. All these they now thoroughly examined. Each closet needed but a glance, for all were empty, and all, by the dust that fell from their doors, had stood long unopened. The cellar, indeed, was filled with crazy lumber, mostly dating from the times of the surgeon who was Jekyll's predecessor. Even as they opened the door, they were advertised of the uselessness of further search by the fall of a perfect mat of cobweb, which had for years sealed up the entrance. Nowhere was there any trace of Henry Jekyll, dead or alive. Poole stamped on the flags of the corridor. "He must be buried here," he said, hearkening to the sound. "Or he may have fled," said Utterson, and he turned to examine the door in the by-street. It was locked, and lying near by on the flags they found the key already stained with rust. This does not look like use," observed the lawyer. "Use?" echoed Poole. "Do you not see, sir, it is broken, much as if a man had stamped on it." "Ah," continued Utterson, "and the fractures, too, are rusty." The two men looked at each other with a scare. "This is beyond me, Poole," said the lawyer. "Let us go back to the cabinet." They mounted the stair in silence, and still, with an occasional awestruck glance at the dead body, proceeded more thoroughly to examine the contents of the cabinet. At one table there were traces of chemical work, various measured heaps of some white salt being laid on glass saucers, as though for an experiment in which the unhappy man had been prevented. "That is the same drug that I was always bringing him," said Poole, and even as he spoke, the kettle with a startling noise boiled over. This brought them to the fireside, where the easy-chair was drawn closely up, and the tea-things stood ready to the sitter's elbow, the very sugar in the cup. There were several books on a shelf, one lay beside the tea-things open, and Utterson was amazed to find a copy of a pious work from which Jekyll had several times expressed a great esteem, annotated in his own hand with startling blasphemies. Next, in the course of the review of the chamber, the searchers came to the cheval glass, into whose depth they looked with an involuntary horror. But it was so no-turned as to show them nothing but the rosy glow playing on the roof, this fire sparkling in 100 repetitions along the glazed front of the presses, and their own pale and fearful countenances stooped to look in. "This glass has seen some strange things, sir," whispered Poole. "And surely none stranger than itself," echoed the lawyer in the same tone. "For what did Jekyll—" He caught himself up at the word with a start, and then conquering the weakness, "What would Jekyll want with it?" he said. "You may say that," said Poole. Next they turned to the business table. On the desk, among the neat array of papers, a large envelope was uppermost, and bore in the doctor's hand the name of Mr. Utterson. The lawyer sealed it, and several enclosures fell to the floor. The first was a will, drawn in the same eccentric terms as the one which he had returned 6 months before, to serve as a testament in case of death and as a deed of gift in case of disappearance. But in the place of the name Edward Hyde, the lawyer, with indescribable amazement, read the name of Gabriel John Utterson. He looked at Poole and then back at the papers. and last of all at the dead malefactor stretched upon the carpet. "My head goes round," he said. "He has been all these days in possession. He had no cause to like me. He must have raged to see himself displaced, and he has not destroyed this document." He caught the next paper, and it was a brief note in the doctor's hand, and dated at the top. "Oh, Poole," the lawyer cried, "he was alive, and here this day. He cannot have been disposed of in so short a space. He must still be alive. He must have fled. And then why fled? And how? And in that case, can we venture to declare this suicide? Oh, we must be careful. I foresee that we may yet involve your master in some dire catastrophe." "Why don't you read it, sir?" asked Poole. "Because I fear," replied the lawyer solemnly, "God grant I have no cause for it." And with that he brought the paper to his eye and read as follows: "My dear Utterson, when this shall fall into your hands, I shall have disappeared. Under what circumstances, I have not the penetration to foresee. But my instincts and all the circumstances of my nameless situation tell me that the end is sure and must be early. Go then, and first read the narrative which Lanyon warned me he was to place in your hands, and if you care to hear more, turn to the confession of your unworthy and unhappy friend, Henry Jekyll." "There was a third enclosure?" asked Utterson. "Here, sir," said Poole, and gave into his hands a considerable packet sealed in several places. The lawyer put it in his pocket. "I would say nothing of this paper. If your master has fled or is dead, we may at least save his credit. It is now 10. I must go home and read these documents in quiet, but I shall be back before midnight, when we shall send for the police." They went out, locking the door of the theater behind them, and Utterson, once more leaving the servants gathered about the fire in the hall, trudged back to his office to read the two narratives, and which this mystery was now to be explained. Dr. Lanyon's narrative. On the 9th of January, now 4 days ago, I received by the evening delivery a registered envelope, addressed in the hand of my colleague and my school companion, Henry Jekyll. I was a good deal surprised by this, for we were by no means in the habit of correspondence. I had seen the man, dined with him, indeed, the night before, and I could imagine nothing in our intercourse that should justify the formality of resignation. The contents increased my wonder, for this is how the letter ran: 10th December, 18 Dear Lanyon, you are one of my oldest friends, and although we have differed at times on scientific questions, I cannot remember, at least on my side, any break in our affection. There was never a day when, if you had said to me, "Jekyll, my life, my honor, my reason depend upon you," I would not have sacrificed my fortune or my left hand to help you. Lanyon, my life, my honor, my reason are all at your mercy. If you fail me tonight, I am lost. I might suppose, after this preface, that I am going to ask you for something dishonorable to grant. Judge for yourself. I want you to postpone all other engagements for tonight. Even if you were summoned to the bedside of an emperor, to take a cab, unless your carriage should be actually at the door, and, with this letter in your hand for consultation, drive straight to my house. Poole, my butler, has his orders. You will find him waiting for your arrival with a locksmith. The door of my cabinet is then to be forced, and you are to go in alone. To open the glazed press, letter E, on the left hand, breaking the lock if it be shut, and draw out, with all its contents as they stand, forth the drawer from the top, or, which is the same thing, the third from the bottom. In my extreme distress of mind, I have a morbid fear of misdirecting you. But even if I am in error, you may know the right drawer by its contents: some powders, a file, and a paper book. This drawer I beg of you to carry back with you to Cavendish Square exactly as it stands. That is the first part of the service. Now for the second. You should be back, if you set out at once on the receipt of this, long before midnight. But I will leave you that amount of margin, not only in the fear of one of those obstacles that can neither be prevented nor foreseen, but because an hour when your servants are in bed is to be preferred for what I will then remain to do. At midnight, then, I have asked you to be alone in your consulting room, to admit with your own hand into the house a man who will present himself in my name, and to place in his hand the drawer that you will have brought with you from my cabinet. Then you will have played your part and earned my gratitude completely. 5 minutes afterwards, if you insist upon an explanation, you will have understood that these arrangements are of capital importance, and that by the neglect of one of them, fantastic as they must appear, you might have charged your conscience with my death or the shipwreck of my reason. Confident as I am that you will not trifle with this appeal, my heart sinks and my hand trembles at the bare thought of such a possibility. Think of me at this hour, in a strange place, laboring under a blackness of distress that no fancy can exaggerate, and yet well aware, if you will but punctually serve me, my troubles will roll away like a story that is told. Serve me, my dear Lanyon, and save your friend H.J. P.S. I had already sealed this up when a fresh terror struck upon my soul. It is possible that the post office may fail me, and this letter not come into your hands until tomorrow morning. In that case, dear Lanyon, do my errand when it shall be most convenient for you in the course of the day, and once more expect my messenger at midnight. It may then already be too late, and if that night passes without event, you will know that you have seen the last of Henry Jekyll. Upon the reading of this letter, I made sure my colleague was insane, but till that was proved beyond the possibility of doubt, I felt bound to do as he requested. The less I understood of this farrago, the less I was in a position to judge of its importance, and an appeal so worded could not be set aside without a grave responsibility. I rose accordingly from table, got into a hansom, and drove straight to Jekyll's house. The butler was awaiting my arrival. He had received by the same post as mine a registered letter of instruction, and had sent at once for a locksmith and a carpenter. The tradesmen came while we were yet speaking, and we moved in the body to Dr. Denman's surgical theatre, from which, as you are doubtless aware, Jekyll's private cabinet is most conveniently entered. The door was very strong, the lock excellent. The carpenter avowed he would have great trouble and have to do much damage if force were to be used, and the locksmith was near despair, but this last was a handy fellow, and after 2 hours' work the door stood open. The press marked E was unlocked, and I took out the drawer, had it filled up with straw and tied in a sheet, and returned it to Cavendish Square. Here I proceeded to examine its contents. The powders were neatly enough made up, but not with the nicety of the dispensing chemist, so that it was plain they were Jekyll's private manufacture. And when I opened one of the wrappers, I found what seemed to me a simple crystalline salt of a white color. The phial, to which I next turned my attention, might have been about half full of blood-red liquor, which was highly pungent in the sense of smell, and seemed to me to contain phosphorus and some volatile ether. At the other ingredients, I could make no guess. The book was an ordinary version book and contained little but series of dates. These covered a period of many years, but I observed that the entries ceased nearly a year ago, and quite abruptly. Here and there a brief remark was expended to a date, usually no more than a single word, double, occurring perhaps 6 times in a total of several hundred entries, and once very early in the list and followed by several marks of exclamation. Total failure. All this, though it whetted my curiosity, told me little that was definite. Here were a phial of some tincture, a paper of some salt, and the record of a series of experiments that had led, like too many of Jekyll's investigations, to no end of practical usefulness. How could the presence of these articles in my house affect either the honor, the sanity, or the life of my flighty colleague? If his messenger could go to one place, why could he not go to another? And even granting some impediment, why was this gentleman to be received to me in secret? The more I reflected, the more convinced I grew that I was dealing with a case of cerebral disease, and though I dismissed my servants to bed, I loaded an old revolver that I might be found in some posture of self-defense. 12 o'clock had scarce rung out over London ere the knocker sounded very gently on the door. I went myself at the summons and found a small man crouching against the pillars at the portico. "Are you come for Dr. Jekyll?" I asked. He told me yes, by a constrained gesture, and when I had bidden him enter, he did not obey me without a searching backward glance into the darkness of the square. There was a policeman not far off, advancing with his bull's eye open, and at the sight I thought my visitor started and made greater haste. These particulars struck me, I confess, disagreeably, and as I followed him into the bright light of the consulting room, I kept my hand ready on my weapon. Here at last I had my chance of clearly seeing him. I had never set eyes on him before. So much was certain. He was small, as I have said. I was struck, besides, with the shocking expression of his face, and his remarkable combination of great muscular activity and great apparent debility of constitution, and, last but not least, with the odd subjective disturbance caused by his neighborhood. This bore some resemblance to my incipient rigor, and was accompanied by a marked sinking of the pulse. At the time I set it down to some idiosyncratic personal distaste, and merely wondered at the acuteness of the symptoms. But I have since had reason to believe that the cause to lie much deeper in the nature of man, and to turn on some nobler hinge than principle of hatred. This person, who had thus from first moment of his entrance struck on me what I can only describe as a disgustful curiosity, was dressed in a fashion that would have made an ordinary person laughable. His clothes, that is to say, although they were of rich and sober fabric, were enormously too large for him in every measurement. The trousers hanging on his legs and rolled up to keep them from the ground, the waist of the coat below his haunches, and the collar sprawling wide upon his shoulders. Strange to relate, this ludicrous accoutrement was far from moving me to laughter, rather as there was something abnormal and misbegotten in the very essence of the creature that now faced me. Something seizing, surprising, and revolting. This fresh disparity seemed but to fit in with and to reinforce it, so that to my interest in the man's nature and character there was added a curiosity as to his origin, his life, his fortune, and status in the world. These observations, though they had taken so great a space to be set down in, were yet the work of a few seconds. The visitor was indeed on fire with somber excitement. "Have you got it?" he cried. "Have you got it?" And so lively was his impatience that he even laid his hand upon my arm and sought to shake me. I put him back, conscious, at his touch, with a certain icy pang along my blood. "Come, sir," said I, "you forget that I have not yet the pleasure of your acquaintance. Be seated, if you please." And I showed him an example, and sat down myself in my customary seat, with as fair an imitation of my ordinary manner to a patient as the lateness of the hour. The nature of my preoccupations, and the horror I had of my visitor, would suffer me to muster. "I beg your pardon, Dr. Lanyon," he replied, civilly enough. "What you say is very well founded, and my impatience has shown its heels to my politeness. Come here at the insistence of your colleague, Dr. Henry Jekyll, on a piece of business of some moment, and I understood." He paused and put his hand to his throat, and I can see, in spite of his collected manner, that he was wrestling against the approaches of hysteria. "I understood a drawer." But here I took pity on my visitor's suspense, and some perhaps on my own growing curiosity. "There it is, sir," said I, pointing to the drawer, where it lay on the floor behind a table and still covered with a sheet. He sprang to it and paused, and laid his hand upon his heart. I could hear his teeth grate with the convulsive action of his jaws, and his face was so ghastly to see that I grew alarmed both for his life and reason. "Compose yourself," I said. He turned a dreadful smile to me, and, as if with the decision of despair, plucked away the sheet. At sight of the contents, he uttered one loud sob of such intense relief that I was petrified. And the next moment, in a voice that was already fairly well under control, "Have you a graduated glass?" he asked. I rose from my place with something of an effort, and gave him what he asked. He thanked me with a smiling nod, measured out a few minims of the red tincture, and added one of the powders. The mixture, which was at first of a reddish hue, began, in proportion as the crystals melted, to brighten in color, effervescence audibly, and to throw off small fumes of vapor. Suddenly, at the same moment, the ebullition ceased, and the compound changed to a dark purple, which faded again more slowly to a watery green. My visitor, who had watched these metamorphoses with a keen eye, smiled, set down the glass upon the table, and then turned and looked upon me with an air of scrutiny. "And now," said he, "to settle what remains. Will you be wise? Will you be guided? Will you suffer me to take this glass in hand and go forth from your house without further parley? Or has the greed of curiosity too much command of you? Think before you answer, for it shall be done as you decide. As you decide, you shall be left as you were before, and neither richer nor wiser, unless the sense of service rendered to a man in mortal distress may be counted as a kind of riches of the soul. Or, if you shall prefer to choose, a new province of knowledge and new avenues to fame and power shall be laid open to you. Here, in this room, upon the instant, and your sight shall be blasted by the prodigy that stagger the unbelief of Satan." "Sir," said I, affecting a coolness that I was far from truly possessing, "you speak enigmas, and you will perhaps not wonder that I hear you with no very strong impression of belief. But I have gone too far in the way of inexplicable services to pause before I see the end." "It is well," replied the visitor. "Lanyon, you remember your vows. What follows is under the seal of our profession, and now, you who have so long been bound to the most narrow and material views, you who have denied the virtue of transcendental medicine, you who have derided your superiors, behold." He put the glass to his lips and drank at one gulp. A cry followed. He reeled, staggered, clutched at the table, and held on, staring with injected eyes, gasping with open mouth. And as I looked, there came, I thought, a change. He seemed to swell. His face became suddenly black, and the features seemed to melt and alter. And the next moment I had sprung to my feet and leaped back against the wall, my arm raised to shield me from that prodigy. my mind submerged in terror. "Oh God!" I screamed, and "Oh God!" again and again, for there before my eyes, pale and shaken and half fainting, and groping before him with his hands like a man restored from death, there stood Henry Jekyll. What he told me in the next hour, I cannot bring my mind to set on paper. I saw what I saw, I heard what I heard, and my soul sickened at it, and yet, now when that sight has faded from my eyes, I ask myself if I believe it, and I cannot answer. My life is shaken to its roots. Sleep has left me. The deadliest terror sits by me at all hours of the day and night. I feel that my days are numbered, and that I must die, and yet I shall die incredulous. As for the mortal and moral turpitude that man unveiled to me, even with tears of penitence, I cannot, even in memory, dwell on it without a start of honor. I will say but one thing, Utterson, and that, if you can bring your mind to credit it, will be more than enough. The creature who crept into my house that night was, on Jekyll's own confession, known by the name of Hyde, and hunted for in every corner of the land as the murderer of Caruth. Castellanian. Well, on that note, boys and girls, we must go to our second music break. On this break, we have Miss Mia Savage with her band Antidote for Savages with The Bottom Line, Singing to Your Grave, Bury Me in Heaven, Not a Phase. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this music break. Welcome back, and thank you so much for joining us this evening on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. So we just finished reading The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and that was by Robert Louis Stevenson, and I believe we have like 10 more pages left. I'm gonna have to save that for Christmas Eve. We'll finish that and then continue on with another novel. Hopefully not so short as this novella that we were just reading. But it's been pretty good so far. I've been pretty intrigued by the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and one of the people in this novella just exposed that he actually saw the transition between the two. So, during this third hour, we shall be partaking of Reddit ghost stories. This one is by u/Zesty Close Royal 7166. The time I acted in a haunted community hall. A couple of years ago, 2020, I performed in a small-town production of the play, And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. We performed it in an old hall that was built right on top of an old military shooting range dating back to World War II. You can actually still see all the dirt mounds they shot at in this hall's basement, as well as some bullet casings still laying around. Anyways, lots of older folks in the cast who have done many shows in that hall claimed it to be haunted. Those stories always excite me, so I love to hear about it. They mostly mentioned how there's this overwhelming sense of fear in the green room, aka dressing room, when you're alone at night, so most of them hated being the ones to lock the place up after hours. During one show, there was a part when I was the only person backstage on the one side. We had big black curtains that blocked the audience from seeing the backstage whenever the door on that side of the set was opened. On this night, one side of the curtain moved very suddenly as if someone had just opened the door and walked past. However, this was at a point in the script when nobody comes through the door other than myself when walking on stage. I thought maybe somebody did come backstage, but when I checked, there wasn't a soul near that curtain. And the way the curtain moved couldn't have been from any random gust of wind. I can't really explain it, but I kinda just shrugged it off at the moment and joked to myself that the ghost just walked and wanted to come to see the show. Thanks for taking the time to read my story. This one is by u/The Celtic Druid 1969. Ghost of Gladstone Villa. The horror of Gladstone Villa is that there was more than one ghost there and it was meant for one family. This was a genuine experience that even convinced a skeptic and non-believer, so it's worth a look and needs to be documented and shared with others. You may research this. What the family experienced defied rational explanations, such as very mild poltergeist activity like lights going off and on electrical cables being pulled by unseen forces. And then there was the occasional sighting, but this was very rare. All this occurred in the former mining town of Bourgaud in the Caerphilly County borough of South Wales Valleys from 1969 to the June of 1978. Bill Higgs and his wife, Rita, moved into Gladstone Villa with their only daughter, Caroline, sometime in 1960. Everything was fine, no incidents at all. Caroline left school in 1965 and got a job in the bakehouse in Baldwin Street, days regular. It was at the bakehouse she met Douglas Dexter. He was from the neighboring village of Aberbargode. He was night's regular, but he often stayed behind to make a cup of tea for Caroline. They started dating and were together for 3 years before they got married in April 1968. They didn't get their own place. They lived at Gladstone Villa with Bill and Rita. Douglas and Caroline's son was born in the August of 1969, and it was soon after this that things started to happen. The family were all downstairs when they heard what sounded like someone jumping on the landing from the ceiling. They looked to see what was going on, naturally thinking it was a break-in, but when they reached the top of the landing, nobody was there, but the hatch to the attic was open. From that day on, the odd activity continued on a daily basis, and whatever it was eventually occupied itself in the master bedroom, which incidentally belonged to Bill and Rita. Noises like loud bangs and dragging sounds could be heard. Footsteps were heard in the bedroom every evening, sometimes during the day when the family would be downstairs watching TV. Bill would turn the volume down to hear it more clearly. Caroline said that on one occasion she went to her son Andrew's cot to find the pillow torn in half. Bill would record noises with his tape recorder, and once he played it back, he heard the sound of an ambulance pulling up outside. But there was no ambulance. A warning? Soon after this, Andrew was in a Cardiff hospital in an oxygen tent. He, of course, recovered from this. A priest was called to Gladstone Villa. He blessed the property, and after a few short prayers, he duly left. But before he left, he parted with these words, "Watch the baby." As Andrew got older, he too witnessed the poltergeist activity himself. He saw the cables being pulled by unseen forces. It all got so bad that the family slept downstairs with the lights on. Only Bill was supposedly brave enough to sleep in that particular room. One time, he had a rather frightening experience in there. He was lying on the bed, and then he couldn't move. But he couldn't even shout out for his family to help him. This could well have been sleep paralysis, but he said later that he felt something in the room with him. A medium was called to Gladstone Villa. He asked the family questions, then he began to change the spirit of knocking on the ceiling, and it immediately knocked back at him. At some point, he went into the trance to try and make contact, but he failed to get a name. He later said that there was a presence there, and it was an earthbound spirit. It had unfinished business, something that it didn't do in life. There was a few sightings. One evening, the family was watching TV. Caroline just happened to look to her left and saw the full solid figure of a monk standing behind the sofa near the doorway. She later described it in detail as a monk in typical brown habit, complete with hood over the head. The family left Gladstone Villa in June 1978, and 2 local businessmen bought the property. It eventually became Red's Park Hotel. Andrew had his 40th birthday there for old time's sake, and it was the staff who told Andrew that they too had also experienced things there. Andrew did a thorough research into the history of Gladstone Villa and the area. He found out from local libraries that Gladstone Villa dated back to the 1900s, and a monastery was close by. This explains the monk Caroline saw. This is a true story. This one is by U/according-seesaw 4388. Very short and sweet. Ghost touch. I think it was a ghost. Something touched me on my foot last night. I told it, "No, that's my foot, don't touch me." And it went away. And at the time, I wasn't scared, just annoyed at being woken up. Was it a ghost? This one is by you/sweet-tidied Essie. Ghosts in my head? I do not know what is happening, but I think we have a ghost. We have a smart bulb in our bedroom, and last night it came on while we were sleeping. I woke up and nudged my boyfriend to ask if he turned it on, and he said he didn't. All of a sudden, it shut off. Then it came back on, dimmed, went super bright, then turned back off. Did that 3 times. We decided to shrug it off, thinking it was the Wi-Fi or Alexa acting up. When we laid back in bed and started going back to sleep, we heard a clear as day, "Psst, hey," and instantly had chills down our bodies. We both snapped out of bed so fast. I stayed in the doorway of the bedroom while my boyfriend cleared the house due to him being a police officer and our area having a lot of breaking and enterings lately. Everything was normal and the doors were still locked. Our dog never reacted when this happened, and the Alexa showed no recent activity in the activity log. What do you guys think? If it is a ghost, is there a way to get it to leave our home? This one is by you/Abby, and it's ABBBHHII. The story is called Ghost in the Bathroom. I love to take a shower at night, but tonight something spooky happened to me. When I was showering, I heard someone laughing, and I thought it would be someone from perhaps a different room. But when I applied a shower gel, I felt a tingling on my back with cold fingers. And suddenly, lights blinked for a second, and I freaked out and left the bathroom, and I heard some girl, a ghost, giggling in the bathroom. I'm thinking to shift from here. This one is by you/straw_B_re. Ghost dog. When you think of a ghost dog, some think lost innocent spirit and others may think demonic. In my case, I'm not really sure how I feel about what I saw. It all began 2017. I had a friend over and we had been playing Minecraft on the PlayStation 3. Excuse me. We played for hours on end, having the time of our lives. Everything was going so well until my grandpa came storming out of his room, demanding we go to sleep. My friend, being completely terrified of my grandpa, went to sleep immediately. On the other hand, I decided to see if I could lay up all night. Note, we were sleeping on our L-shaped couch together. She was on one side and I was on the other. Hours passed. I was still lying awake with no phone, only a crappy dinosaur watch from Checkers shop. I couldn't tell the time, even though it was 11 and everyone else in my class could. I sort of figured it was about 3 because the hands were on 3. I stopped, staring at the roof, and looked over to the mini lounge next to the couch that had 2 pink velvet couches, one of which, to my disbelief, a dog appeared standing on top of the back of the couch of the 2-seater sofa. It wasn't a normal dog, though. It was a skeleton dog. Of a dog, quite a big dog, that was staring forward into the mirror across the room, its eyes red and body emitting black smoke. In that moment, I didn't feel any fear anymore. There was a sense of curiosity and calmness. I wasn't afraid whatsoever, and I just stared. I thought I was asleep, but I was awake, and it was really happening. I just laid there staring at this demonic-looking dog. No sound around the surrounding area displayed faint color of objects around me, accompanied by fuzz and sprinkles of gray. This dog disappeared after a few blinks. In the morning, my friend woke in her own pee. She had peed the bed, and she has never done it before, and it could have been a coincidence, but I don't think so. To this day, everyone has put this up to my imagination, but I know that this was real. And this actually happened, by the way. This one is by u/prestigious_neck_873. My mom's heartwarming story. My grandma unfortunately passed away around 5 years ago. She was living here with my grandpa, and they were both on my mom's side. And unfortunately, again, yesterday, my grandfather passed. What makes this a ghost story is what happened twice the night before their passing. The night after my grandma passed, my mom had a very vivid dream she told us about. The dream started with my grandma coming out of her room. My mom was in tears asking her, "Mom, are you okay?" And Grandma reassured her multiple times, don't worry, I'm fine." My mom looks down and noticed that my grandma's oxygen tank wasn't plugged, and she wasn't connected to it. "Mom, your oxygen," my mom said. Grandma looked at her endearingly and said, "Oh, I don't need that thing anymore." And she then woke up. Fast forwarding to more recently, my grandpa has been very sick recently. He gave up on his health and took very, very poor care of himself and don't expect any help and often said he wanted to die. My mom tried so hard to get him to change his life and go to the hospital, but he would not go or take any medicine. One day, we heard nothing coming from his room. We could usually hear a TV on, him coughing once in a while, but there was nothing. At this point, he was gone, but we didn't know that. That night, she had another dream, but this time with my grandpa. He walked out of his room and made his way to the restroom, and Mom asked, "Oh my God, are you fine? We haven't heard from you." He smiled, looked at her and said, "Yes, don't worry, we are okay now," and slowly smiled with tears in his eyes, and she woke up the next day and ran into the room and found him passed away. What makes it crazier is that both dreams happened the night of the day they passed, even though my mom did not know that my grandpa died that day. May they rest in peace. This one is by u/Joint Destroyer. One of my wildest experiences. So, to give you a quick context, me and my 3 friends explored this abandoned house about 5 years ago, our sophomore year of high school, and this house had the creepiest energy, and it also had a Ouija board inside a room with a bunch of scratch marks, so it was forever known as the creepy haunted abandoned house. Some more context, I had a dream on this road that I will be referencing where I was driving, and on this road were these 2 ghostly looking figures with decayed faces that were absolutely terrifying. Okay, so now for the story. I was hanging at my friend's house with my 2 other friends. I'll call them Harold and Pete. We played the new horror game, The Devil Inside Me, so we were already kind of creeped out. We left out buddies, and Harold left about 5 minutes before I did. As I'm driving, I get to the road that I had a dream on. Obviously, at this point, I'm not thinking anything of it. However, Harold calls me, kind of freaking out about how he drove past that abandoned house, which has always been on the way to his house. And it had its two main hall lights on, which was never noticed to be on. And he was telling me how freaky it was that this was the first time it's ever happened, especially after playing this horror game. Now, immediately after he told me this, I felt a huge vibe change, turned into the super dark vibe, and immediately I knew something was going to happen. I thought back on that dream I had and thought for sure something was going to happen. As I approached this spot in my dream, a raccoon came out of nowhere and I smacked the shit out of it. My first ever time hitting an animal was right after Harold called me about that house. That whole vibe felt like it was all planned. The fact that this all happened at once within a couple minutes was pretty crazy. I do believe he called me with that bad juju, and this all happened because of that. I feel like I didn't explain this the best I could, but thought I would at least share it. This one is by you/infamous-benefit 7825. Phone recording. Can you hear me? Alright, so this must have been early 2000s during the summer after I was in 3rd or 4th grade. My mom had just gotten a new flip phone, and if you remember, back then, you could record audio and make it your ringtone. I was in the backseat of her van as my mom was driving me home from her parents. We had just pulled out of the driveway when I took her phone to record the guitar solo that was playing on the radio. I honestly wish that I remember what song it was, but unfortunately I do not. It was most likely a classic rock song, though, as that is mainly what she used to listen to. Anyway, I recorded like a 15-second clip with a song to make a ringtone, but when I play it back, there are words. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? It was very clear, and I showed it to multiple people that all heard the same thing. It kind of sounded like Stitch from Lilo and Stitch sang it while gargling water. And what was really weird, the last me that was said turned back into a guitar strum. Could be a glitch, could be a ghost, I don't know, but I definitely had physical proof of something. This one is by you/NorsePagan07. I met an evil ghost. English is not my first language. Sorry for the mistakes. So to give some background information, I'm spiritual. If you don't know what that is, spirituality involves the recognition of a feeling or sense or belief that there is something greater than myself, something more than being human, than the sensory experience. I believe in souls, spirit guides, and reincarnation, etc. My friend is a medium and can connect with spirit guides and also ghosts and ghouls. My friend and I were hanging out at her place. We had the house to ourselves and decided to do a session. She was doing a session on me, and I asked normal questions like, what's my future like, and so on, until I asked a question about one of my friends. This friend of mine has some trouble and has been battling depression, anxiety, and some other things. I asked if we could try and connect with her spirit guides and ask what has happened to her. We tried that. Bad idea. My friend, who was doing the session, had her eyes closed and was holding my hand. Her face started to twitch in an uncomfy way, but I didn't want to disturb her, so I said nothing. Suddenly, the room that we were in had this weird vibe, an unwelcoming vibe, just a very unpleasant vibe. She suddenly stood up from the couch we were sitting on. She went to grab some incense lights and started saying, "You're not welcome here. Get out of my house." I've never experienced anything like this, as I was new to all of this at the time. Suddenly, this terrible feeling came rushing to me. I don't know how to describe it. I think anyone that met a ghost/soul knows what I'm talking about. The best way that I can put this is it was trapped. I felt trapped. No matter where I went in the room, I felt trapped and small, like I was someone's prey, like I was being watched. Thankfully, my friend got this ghost/soul out of the house and we sat down to talk about what just happened. My friend told me this is what is called a clinging spirit. It's a spirit that feeds on negativity and sadness, or in my friend's case, her depression and anxiety. My friend told me what she saw afterward. To understand this, you need to understand the floor plan. So, right as you enter the house, there is a staircase that goes upstairs. And on the right is the kitchen, and on the left is the living room where we were. Neither of these rooms has doors, it's just the wall with a hole in it. The living room couch is at the opposite end of the entryway, so you have a full view from here. My friend said in the doorway she saw this tall and skinny black goo. It had no face, but it had the shape of a woman's body. The moment it appeared in the doorway, it started screaming at my friend, like a very loud, painful screaming. A horror movie scream. The moment she opened her eyes, the ghost wasn't there, but the feeling of its presence was. That's also what I felt. After all this happened, we called my friend's mom and sister, and we slept in the guest room, as we were too afraid to go upstairs to my friend's bedroom. We were 15 when this happened. I just wanted to share this as I'm new to the Reddit, so I thought this was a good start to welcome myself here. This one is by u/IDK what o saucer Saucer IDK WHATOPUTASUSER. My first ghost sightings are even scarier than I first thought. Hey, I'm new as I just had my first sighting, but I feel the need to tell people for any explanation possible. The first one may have an explanation, but I believe it to be contact from an unknown power. The first sighting, this is not really a sighting, but an experience, which is in the corner of our dining room, is an old wooden cabinet that we have things like glasses and memories inside. One early morning, we were packing to go on holiday, and we opened the cabinet for some reason, and a glass flew out at us. There were no glasses at the edge. The next one with the cabinet is, we were having a dinner a couple weeks later, and the largest elephant ornament, which was 1 foot away from falling off the top. We thought it was due to someone jumping, but it was the largest and heaviest thing on there. You could see the skid marks in the dust after you lifted the elephant up, meaning something had moved it. The second and scariest sighting. Same house, nothing different. My parents were on holiday and my sister was in bed. It was just me downstairs. I looked at my second monitor as I was playing on my PC, and in the corner of my eye, I saw a dark, tall figure walk from the cabinet to the kitchen. Me, being an idiot, told my friend, "1 sec," and I ran to the kitchen, and there was nothing. A week later, I told my family, and my sister responded, "Yeah, I've seen it a couple times," and my dad said once he was in the living room and he saw it as clear as day walk opposite him and match the description I gave when I hadn't told them what it looked like. Spooky. Well, on that note, boys and girls, thank you so much once again for joining me this evening on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. It's been really awesome reading to you the story of The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. And then we followed up with some Reddit ghost stories. I hope you guys have enjoyed your time here. I've really enjoyed my time, and I do enjoy this every week. It's so nice to hang out with you guys and share these different original horror stories that a lot of people have grown up on, and then also following up with, some newer stories from people around the world. So if you have any guests that you would like me to book in the future, please just send me an email at weareparadoxmedia@gmail.com. Let me know who you would like for us to try to get on our show, and I will try my damnedest to try to get them on here. So I believe next time we have story time, which is on Christmas Eve, we will be reading and finishing The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and then continuing on with a new book of my own choosing. I want to thank all of our friends on We Are Paradox Media's Facebook, KPNL Radio, Twitter, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, and wherever else you may be listening beyond the Omniverse tonight. I had a wonderful time this evening, and I can't wait to do it again. This next coming weekend, we have Mr. Jim Moses on Saturday, and then we have Backroads Paranormal on Sunday. Don't forget, you guys, we were all in this together. Together, we can make the world a little better. And together, my friends, we are Paradox Media, because without you, there is no us. Our after parties are now singled down to Saturday nights, so if you'd like to join us for those, just look me up under Skype at live:@tessa.n.thomas30, or give us a little jingle jangle over at 970-335-9596. Until next time, nighty night, love and light to all my ears, and I will see you back here same time,